We often hear that things like diet and exercise are, fundamental to living a long, healthy life.
Absolutely.
And Japan, of course, is famous for its remarkable life expectancy,
Huh.
often linked back to that traditional diet.
Right. The fish, the vegetables, all that.
But what if some of the other keys to well-being are found in less expected daily rituals? Maybe things we don't talk about as much.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah. Beyond the well-known dietary habits, there are these really ingrained cultural practices in Japan. Things like bathing, using hot springs onsen, and even specific ways of consuming green tea. These aren't usually the first things we think of when discussing longevity, are they?
Not really, which is why our source for this deep dive is so fascinating. It's a research paper that actually dug into these very specific Japanese habits: seasonal hot water bathing, visiting onsen facilities, and green tea consumption to see how they relate to health and happiness.
Exactly. And they focused in on residents in Shizuoka prefecture. That's a region particularly well known for its green tea production.
Ah,
Yeah. Their goal was really to understand if these activities had measurable associations with like self-rated health, sleep quality, and just overall happiness among people living there.
so they wanted to pinpoint potentially healthy activities that maybe should be encouraged, and they looked at year-round effects and even like details like how you drink your green tea, brewed versus bottled.
Precisely, that level of detail. So the
Hmm.
study surveyed a pretty large group, 6,000 residents. They got responses back from just over half, about 3,000 people.
Okay, decent response rate.
Yeah, 50.9%. And they use statistical methods, logistic regression, to explore the links between these habits and what they called self-rated health, or SRH.
SRH. So that covered subjective health, feeling rested, and happiness.
That's right. Subjective health status, feeling like you got sufficient sleep and rest, and subjective happiness. And importantly, they controlled for other factors too, like sex, age, and income to try and isolate the habit's influence.
Okay, good. So let's unpack the findings then, because this is where it gets really interesting, especially I thought with bathing. I mean, it's huge in Japanese culture, right?
Mhm.
But they made this sharp distinction between actually soaking in a tub and just, grabbing a shower.
Yes, and what's really striking is the contrast they found, just stark. The study reported that daily bathing, and that specifically means soaking in a tub, was consistently associated with positive outcomes, pretty much across the board.
Like what specifically?
We're talking good subjective health, sufficient sleep and rest, and high subjective happiness.
And that held up all year round, regardless of the season.
It did, yeah. The paper gives us the odds ratios for daily bathing. It was about 1.27 for good subjective health. So people soaking daily were roughly 27% more likely to report good subjective health compared to those who didn't.
Okay.
For sufficient sleep, it was even stronger, 1.41, so 41% more likely. And for high subjective happiness, 1.35, about 35% more likely. Those are, pretty solid associations for just a daily habit.
Yeah, definitely. Did they suggest why? What's the mechanism?
Well, the researchers propose it's primarily the thermal effect, the hot water itself. Soaking in warm water helps dilate blood vessels, which improves circulation,
Right.
and that can help deliver oxygen better, remove waste products, basically refreshing the body. And that could lead to better sleep and just feeling better overall.
But then you look at the flip side, what they found for people who reported only showering.
Exactly. And the results were, well, essentially the opposite. Taking showers only was associated with poor subjective health, insufficient sleep and rest, although that sleep link was maybe a bit less clear in summer,
Okay.
and low subjective happiness.
Wow. So based on this study, not soaking, just showering
Mm-hmm.
seems linked to negative outcomes in these areas.
That's what the association suggests. The odds ratios were below 1, reflecting that. Around 0.75 for poor subjective health if you only shower, 0.69 for insufficient sleep, and 0.66 for low subjective happiness. And the paper kind of suggests this is because showering, while it gets you clean, it just doesn't provide that deep body warming needed for those same physiological benefits you get from a proper soak.
That really highlights the type of bathing as being crucial here. Soaking good, showering only. Maybe not so much for these particular benefits. What about onsen then? The hot springs, they're often more recreational, right?
Right. So the study looked at that too. They found that using onsen facilities at least monthly was associated with high subjective happiness.
Okay, specifically happiness for onsen.
Yeah, that was the main link they found, an odds ratio of 1.25. And again, this association held up regardless of the season.
So adding a monthly trip to a hot spring seems linked to feeling happier.
It seems so. And the paper also mentions, kind of in passing, that other studies point to even broader potential health benefits from onsen visits. Things like possibly reducing mortality risk from stroke, cardiovascular disease, even bone fractures, and improvements in mental health, too.
Right, that makes sense. I mean, you go to an onsen to relax, right?
Yes.
It's a break.
Exactly. It's often seen as leisure, a form of relaxation, a break from the daily grind. The paper frames them exactly that way, as recreation contributing to mental well-being, specifically happiness.
And that connection, recreation, and happiness, that pops up a lot in well-being research, doesn't it?
It definitely does. It seems pretty universal.
Okay, let's switch gears then. Green tea.
Yep.
Obviously, Japan is famous for it. Did the study find a health link there, too?
They did, and this is another place where the details really, really matter.
Okay.
So the study reported that daily consumption of at least 500 milliliters really, so a decent amount of brewed green tea was associated with good subjective health. The odds ratio there was 1.24.
Right. Brewed green tea linked to feeling healthier. That kind of fits with what you generally hear about tea, antioxidants, and all that.
Yeah.
But you said details matter.
Yes, because here's the twist, and honestly, maybe one of the most surprising findings in the paper for me. Daily consumption of at least 200 milliliters of canned or bottled green tea
Yeah.
was actually linked to poor subjective health, an odds ratio of 0.74.
Wait, really? That's a huge difference.
Yeah.
So brewed tea associated with good subjective health, but the prepackaged stuff with poor subjective health, according to this data.
Exactly. It's a pretty dramatic contrast. Makes you stop and think, doesn't it?
It really does. Why? Did they say why?
Well, they point to the known good stuff in green tea categories in caffeine, theanine, vitamin C, and its antioxidant properties. Other studies link it to preventing things like obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular issues. That likely explains the positive finding for brewed tea.
But the opposite finding for bottled tea. They didn't really dig into the why there.
No, the paper doesn't specifically spell out the reasons for that negative association. You could speculate maybe. Differences in processing, added sugars or preservatives in some bottled teas, or maybe just a lower concentration of the beneficial compounds compared to brewing it fresh.
Interesting. Lots of possibilities.
It's a fascinating point that definitely raises more questions.
They also had some interesting regional data to back this up, didn't they? About Shizuoka itself.
Yeah, they mentioned that Shizuoka prefecture, where they did the study, actually has the highest volume of green tea purchases in Japan. And it also happens to have a longer life expectancy compared to the national average.
Yeah.
And they noted Nara and Kyoto, which are also high green tea consuming prefectures, show similar trends. It's correlational, of course, but it adds a layer of context.
So if we step back a bit, look at the bigger picture. The study seems to reinforce this idea that subjective well-being, how healthy and happy we feel, is pretty tightly linked to actual health outcomes and longevity.
That's a key takeaway. They suggest that these daily habits, like soaking in a tub or drinking brewed tea, might contribute to a longer life, partly through their positive impact on how healthy people feel about themselves.
And it seems like bathing and maybe the onsen visits have this particular link to happiness, maybe because they offer those moments of relaxation, warmth, maybe even social connection with onsen, making them feel like valuable recreational time.
Absolutely. It definitely underscores the potential value of building these simple, enjoyable rituals into our daily or weekly routines.
Now, we always have to talk about study limitations, right? The researchers themselves pointed some out.
Oh, for sure. And they were careful about it. The big one is that this was cross-sectional. It's just a snapshot in time.
Meaning correlation, not causation.
Exactly. It shows associations between habits and outcomes, but it absolutely cannot prove that the habits cause the outcomes. It's possible, for instance, that people who already feel healthier or happier are just more likely to take daily baths or brew their tea, reverse causation.
Right, that makes sense.
And they also mentioned the response rate was around 50%, with slight differences between men and women responding, which could, potentially introduce some bias.
Okay.
Plus, as we said, all the health and happiness stuff was self-reported, so it's subjective, not like a clinical measurement.
True. But they did argue it's still valuable data.
Right. They did. They rightly point out that even with those inherent limitations of a survey design, it's still a large-scale study. That gives the observed associations a significant degree of weight, even if they aren't definitive causal proof.
Okay. So, pulling back from Shizuoka specifically, what can we, wherever we're listening from, maybe take away from these findings?
Well, I think it prompts us to reflect on whether there are some universal principles at play here. Is there something fundamental about the benefits of warmth, maybe relaxation?
Or maybe even the difference between mindfully preparing something, like brewing tea, versus just grabbing the convenient, ready-to-drink version. Could that distinction have similar effects on our well-being, regardless of the specific culture?
It's possible, taking that moment to soak in warm water, prioritizing a simple ritual like brewing tea. Maybe these aren't just like minor comforts. Maybe they're habits that genuinely contribute to our overall sense of health and happiness, just like this study suggests.
It certainly makes a compelling case for paying more attention to these seemingly small parts of our daily lives.
I think so too.
So just to quickly recap this deep dive then, drawing from this study in Shizuoka Prefecture, Japan, we saw some pretty compelling associations. Daily hot water bathing soaking, that is monthly onsen visits, and daily consumption of brewed green tea were all linked to better subjective health, sufficient sleep, and higher subjective happiness.
And crucially, the study highlighted that stark contrast, finding that showering only and consuming canned or bottled green tea were linked to the opposite things like poor subjective health and insufficient sleep.
Right. And the researchers wrapped up by suggesting that these particular habits, soaking, onsen, brewed tea, might be beneficial enough that they should be actively encouraged, maybe even included in public health promotion in Japan.
Which kind of leaves us with this final thought for you, the listener, to consider. Reflecting on these findings, how do you think seemingly simple daily habits, even the ones just focused on comfort or enjoyment, like taking a hot bath or mindfully making a cup of tea, how might those actually contribute to our overall sense of health and happiness in the long run?